Hi, everybody. All right, in addition to the stride model, we can also look at creating use and misuse cases. So in this case, we start with a user who is ultimately going to try to access an application server. That's their goal. So the very first step is that they're going to enter their username and password. And of course, that password serves as authentication. So with that first step, what are the threats here? Well, a big threat is that there is a brute force authentication attempt. A brute force attack is where a hacker could try using every character combination possible to guess the username and password. Or the attacker could just guess the username and password based on what the hacker already knows about usernames at the organization and common passwords people use. And finally, the hacker could try dictionary attacks. Dictionary attacks involve using a text file with many gigabytes of possible entries, including those that contain special characters. Dictionary attacks have become much more sophisticated over the years, since so many users include special characters in their passwords now. So how do we mitigate against these threats? One way we do this is to show a generic error message when the hacker gets the password wrong. We don't provide a specific error message about what was wrong in the failed attempt. Another thing we can do is lock an account after a certain number of failed attempts. That will prevent an automated program from being able to keep running and trying different combinations. And another way to mitigate against these kinds of threats is to require users to have passwords that have a minimum length and a certain amount of complexity. Complexity does not always equal security. These days, we recommend that users create longer passwords rather than more complex ones. So this gives you an idea of how a use-misuse case works and how it is used for threat modeling. You could take this same model to look at the case of an individual trying to access a file. You would consider the threats and vulnerabilities and how they could be exploited. Then you would consider the mitigation strategies. Another way to do threat modeling, which is not shown on this slide, is risk scenarios. This is where you simply list your assets, then list all the things that could threaten those assets. Then you could list the vulnerabilities. Then you play the what-if game to consider the scenarios that could threaten your assets. The most important thing is to consistently document your risks, so you can figure out how to mitigate them. To wrap up risk identification, we started off by talking about risk management and reducing residual risk to a level acceptable to senior management. Then we talked about looking at our assets, as well as the threats and vulnerabilities and where those come together. That is our risk. And the tool we talked about for identifying risk is to use threat modeling. For this, we can use the stride model, or the use-misuse cases, or it can be risk scenarios. The most important thing to remember is that with risk management, you have to start with risk identification first.